recall that it was like a month ago, I went down to Olympia to ask questions of socialist state lawmaker Shaun Scott. He was specifically introducing a proposal to pass yet another massive new tax on businesses, and we had a couple lively exchanges. There seems to be a general kind of laughter or disdain for job creators. And the truth is our state has, and that's proof of it. The truth is, there are a ton of businesses who will be impacted. Several restaurants near Amazon just closed. And the result is Amazon's moving jobs out. There's this entire ecosystem of small businesses that relies on those jobs being there. So this sort of disdain or scoffing for the contributions that some of those major corporations have made up and down our economy is sort of bewildering to people who understand it. So after that, next day or 2 days later, I get an email from Shaun Scott's office. And it was a very nice email, and they said, hey, Representative Scott, I know you guys exchanged a few questions and answers on the steps of the Capitol, but he would love to come on your show and talk about the Well Washington Fund. And I told Nicole, I said, am I being trolled here? I might have to check the authenticity of the people emailing me. But no, they wanted him to come on. And so right before we left for our holiday break, Representative Shaun Scott, a socialist, joined us here on Undivided to talk about maybe socialism having a moment, his tax proposals in Olympia, and my belief that those tax proposals are completely out of touch with reality. Shaun Scott, welcome to Undivided. I said, welcome to our secret lair.
All the way out here.
Don't be telling your Antifa friends where we're at, okay? Do I have your word?
Some of them might know, but they don't make it out to this side of the state too much.
Well, I did go to an ICE this side of the state. We're right by Seattle.
Yeah.
I did go to an ICE protest where they had my home address on a piece of cardboard, like on a sign. And so I was like, well, it is public. So why are you here?
I'm here because I wanted to talk to you and talk to your viewers. I suspect that you command a viewership of people that really, really care a lot about seeing something like House Bill 2100 and the Well Washington Fund pass. Housing, healthcare, and higher education are, I think, three universally supported programs in our state that are in danger due to one kind of austerity budgeting or another. And so I think it's important that we clear the air around what HB 2100, what the Well Washington Fund is going to do for the people of our state.
I disagree that I have a viewership that is going to want to see this pass, but maybe at the end of it you'll have convinced them, but I find it very unlikely. But I do appreciate you reaching out. I think one thing that differentiates you and other socialists that I've interviewed from the Democratic Party is you like to defend your policies. They don't want to defend their policies, they just want to implement them.
It's funny that you say that. What I have found actually is that housing, healthcare, higher education, cash assistance programs are supported as much in Republican so-called red legislative districts in our state as they are in hyper-urban districts like the one that I represent. The 19th and 35th legislative districts, pretty staunchly Republican. Those are areas where you have 1 in 7, 1 in 6 people depending on food stamps. They are areas where you see a much more intense reliance on Medicaid, Medicare, percentage-wise, of course, than you do in districts like my own that are, once again, very hyper-urban. So with these programs being programs that are right now in a state of potentially going to be underfunded because of Trump's H.R. 1 budget and because of other actions that were taken earlier this year in the state legislative session, that's why I believe that these are programs that people across our state, across Washington, want to see supported and funded, and that's what my bill, HB 2100, is all about.
Great. Well, we'll talk about it. We'll see. I think we agree with the things, but how we get there and how we fund it versus using existing revenue is probably going to be the point of differential, so we'll discuss that. You probably have more intimate knowledge of the inner workings of the budget than I do because you're actually in the room with folks, so I look forward to hearing about it.
Absolutely.
For people, we've met several years ago when you were running for city council, but for people who aren't familiar with your background, give me the Shaun Scott background. Like I'm talking childhood, family, just like where are you from? And
right. Well, I spent my first few years of life in Queens, New York. Actually, where I lived was Lefrak City. That is an area within the congressional district, New York 14, that Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez represents currently in Washington, D.C. Watched with great interest as another, Queens politician, a Queens POC socialist, and Mayor-elect Mamdani, I should say, was elected recently. So I think my New York roots, somebody who comes from New York City, a very big, diverse city, but also a place that has a lot of concerns around affordability, the same way that Seattle and Washington State do. Really shaped, I guess, my outlook and how I look at politics. My parents are Jamaican. I am a Jamaican American. I'm somebody who has that identity and wears it very, very proudly. In the 1970s, Jamaica was a country that underwent an experiment with democratic socialism. My parents met as unionized nurses in a New York City hospital. So I think it's about, trying to do right by my values, the communities that produced me, that made my career in politics even a possibility.
So are you a first-generation American citizen?
I was born in New York City.
You were born in New York City, and your parents were not?
They were not.
They were born in Jamaica. But have you been there to visit where your parents
I have,
grew
yeah.
up?
I've been there a couple of times when I was very, very young.
Whereabouts were they from in Jamaica?
So my father is from a place called St. Thomas. My mother is from St. Anne, which is actually the first place that Christopher Columbus sailed in the Western Hemisphere, was right there in St. Anne in Jamaica.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what's with New York City deporting its socialists to Seattle? Because now we got Katie Wilson, and she's from New York State. What brought you out to Seattle?
That's really funny. So for me, it has to do with the fact that, New York and Seattle, I think, have really, really similar political concerns right now. So people talk about, I've heard that before about what's with kind of the influence that New York seems to have on Seattle and Washington State politics. My parents came out here a little bit after my dad. I grew up with my dad. My parents divorced at some point in the 80s. And came out here because my dad was looking for work, looking for a better way. I think he's probably a lot like many people who came to Seattle in the 1990s when the city was a boomtown. So yeah, that's how we ended up here.
So then the difference between you and Katie Wilson and you and Zohran Mamdani is you're not a Nepo baby, it doesn't sound like. You grow up rich?
No, I grew up pretty poor.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who have experiences growing up with poverty will tell you this, that they didn't know that they were poor until they saw other people who were not. And it was like, oh, I guess that must be what we are. But, I grew up in a household where there was always a lot of dignity and a lot of pride. A family that depended on a lot of the programs that I think I try to stand up for even today in the state legislature. So once again, I think it's about, watering my roots and making it so that people that are coming up behind me have an easier time of influencing our politics and getting involved than I did having to come up.
When I saw you down in Olympia at your press conference, I'm going to fumble the exact words, but you introduced yourself as a proud socialist.
That's right.
Are you a socialist or a democratic socialist?
I am a democratic socialist because I am a member of the Seattle Democratic Socialists of America. Sure. I've been a member since January 4th, 2017. What I've really come to see in my time, both running for office and the year that I've spent in the legislature, is people care a lot more about results and leadership than they do about rhetoric and labels. So my values as a socialist, I don't run from those. I actually feel that they make me a more able representative than maybe I would be otherwise.
Why do you think socialism is having a little bit of a moment?
We never went away. Washington State, have you ever read the book Red Harbor? There's an author named Aaron Goings. So he wrote a really incredible book that came out this year where he talked about the influence that lumber workers played in creating immense corporate profits for timber titans in Washington State. That is a story that goes all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century. We have been a state historically that has affirmed our rights to organize, for people to form unions. Washington State, I believe, has the third highest union density of any state in the country, behind, I believe it's New York and Hawaii. So I think that as basically we start to run into more and more crises that this economic system has produced, crises of affordability, crises of sustainability, accessibility for many people as well, socialist ideas, which have always been there, are going to start to become more and more attractive to more and more people. And I don't think you can sort of dispute the record on this question in recent years. More kinds of socialist elected officials, and where socialists themselves are not elected. Our policy positions are quite popular. There were more people that cast a ballot to retain our state's capital gains tax to fund early learning and childcare than voted for Governor Ferguson. If Tax the Rich were magically to become like an embodied political candidate, right? That candidate would have received more votes, would be more popular, and was actually supported within a lot of red legislative districts, GOP legislative districts, that also voted for Dave Reichert. So for me, it's about the ideas, not the individual. And that's what my bill, House Bill 2100, is about. It's about supporting programs that we know people across our state depend on. Medicaid, higher education, housing services, healthcare.
Yeah, and I think I'll disagree, and we can discuss it. I want people to understand who you are, because I think there's a good opportunity. And when I know I deeply disagree with someone, and I deeply disagree with so many of the policy positions that you hold, to me, I always find it productive to try to understand what got them to that place in their life. Like, what is their background and what is influencing their perspective of the world. And so I think I always find that helpful. So I think my viewers will find it helpful as well. On the socialism front, I don't see a lot of daylight between the policies that you're talking about and the policies of the Democratic Party in Washington State. I think a lot of the progressives in Olympia are actually socialists. I mean, do you see, when you talk about things, everything and you're like, that's a great thing. And I'm like, that's a terrible thing. When you talk about, like, unions isn't a socialist idea per se. I mean, progressives are and liberal Democrats are very supportive of unions. When I see a lot of the policies they've passed, rent control, pay for striking workers, reparations, the community reinvestment program, to me, those are socialist policies. Do you disagree?
I would say that those fall pretty much in the line of what I would consider social democratic policies, and I supported just about every program that you mentioned right there.
Is there one you didn't?
You said community reinvestment.
You weren't in the legislature, but the idea of it, the community reinvestment program, covenant home ownership program, pay for striking workers.
Right, absolutely. And I had worked with my predecessor, Speaker Emeritus Frank Chop, on actually helping to get the covenant home ownership project passed before I got to the legislature officially as a state representative. I had worked as a lobbyist for many years, so I was around for a lot of those conversations.
Okay.
I would say that many of the policies that you mentioned, though they are redistributive in nature, they, to me, strike me a little bit more as kind of social democratic policies. A socialist, I think, is somebody who believes in collective ownership of many of the institutions that our people depend on. Yes, unions, because democratizing workplace decisions is something that tends to be good for not only workers, but actually tends to be pretty good for business as well, as it turns out. Somebody who believes in publicly owned utilities. Somebody who thinks that the redistribution of wealth, when wealth is hoarded by 1 or 2% of the largest and corporations or wealthiest individuals, that tends to be bad for everybody. So I think it's a question of how far you're willing to go in pursuit of the ideals that you say that you have. And for me, I'm somebody who did not take corporate campaign contributions. So when big business lobbyists come knocking at my door in Olympia, they tend to know where my positions are going to be, who I'm trying to stand up for. At the same time, House Bill 2100 and the Well Washington Fund, it's going to be good for business too, though that is not the aim. And I'll explain what I mean by that. The Washington State DSHS has indicated that for every $1 of food stamp support that is allocated to Washington State, $1.50 in economic activity is generated. Many of the largest corporations in our state actually supported the workforce education account in 2019 because they understood one thing that was good for business is to have a well-educated workforce. I don't think that people starving and dying early is going to be good for business, so that's why the Well Washington Fund's support of Medicaid is something that's going to be something that I think is good for the overall business climate and for working people. And having a roof over your head and the housing services that my bill is going to fund as well, I think is going to be something that will contribute to the economic health of our state by watering the economy at the grassroots, and that is with working and everyday people in our state.
Yeah. Wow, there's a lot there for me to unpack. The fundamental flaw in your line of thought there is the idea that in a state with a $78 billion budget, we can't already afford to make sure that people don't starve and die. That's absurd. And that's really what, when I was in Olympia questioning you, I was trying to articulate. We have this massively ballooning budget, even after accounting for inflation. And the idea that when you have a budget that's increased 170% since 1991, even when you account for population growth and inflation, that we still as a state can't afford to make sure people don't starve and die. That to me is indicative of a spending problem, of a priority problem, and not of a revenue issue. How can we not, with $78 billion, make sure people don't starve and die?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. So I look at, and once again, the legislation that has really been kind of the center of a lot of conversations that I've been having about Washington state spending priorities, is designed to reinforce particular silos of public sector spending that people depend a lot on that might go away because of both federal and state level austerity budgeting. We stand to lose 50 billion, B as in Bill Gates, dollars worth of Medicaid spending over the next decade. That is going to hit rural hospitals. That's going to hit the University of Washington's hospital safety net program.
Why are we going to lose $50 billion in Medicaid spending?
Well, because there's going to be a dramatic rollback in federal Medicaid spending as a result of H.R. 1 and as a result of certain reductions in Medicaid spending that were made earlier this year.
But why would we under H.R. 1 be losing Medicaid funding?
We would be losing Medicaid funding because that is what H.R. 1 dictates for American states.
And what is it dictating? I want to make sure we understand. It's not a quiz. The restrictions put in under H.R. 1 have to do with proving that you're eligible for the benefits that the federal government gives out. So if people can't prove they're eligible, they shouldn't get that money, right? So that money would go away because the people can't prove that they are eligible for it.
So I think that a lot of what people have talked about with respect to Medicaid is that if we just find a way of eliminating, fraud or waste somehow in the program, that there are many people who are using the program who should not be. The amount of people that are perhaps in the Medicaid system that might even qualify with the threshold that you're discussing falls within less than 1%, so that you can't get anywhere near recuperating the $50 billion that we might lose by focusing on the extremely small percentage of people that might have a dubious standing within the Medicaid program. You make wholesale reductions and changes to Medicaid by removing support to hospitals, by removing support to universities that have healthcare networks like the University of Washington in my district, and by just outright kicking people off of and out of the program, imposing work requirements. That's how you get to the wholesale kinds of reductions that, again, are going to hit some of our rural and GOP-led districts as hard as they're going to hit folks in Democratic and blue districts.
So you're opposed to, and like, to be fair here, there are stipulations that the president is putting on money that I think reasonable people can disagree with, right?
You would disagree with them?
No. I'm saying reasonable people could have a conversation where they disagree. For example, the Department of Health and Human Services came out and said, we're going to basically take money away from hospitals that participate in the mutilation of children. So reasonable people, I think, can disagree with the notion that you would take money away from a hospital because they're performing gender surgeries on children. That's what I say by reasonable people could disagree, but there is a way to keep that funding coming in, and it's to abide by what the Trump administration wants us to do as a state, and in education, like getting rid of DEI and college campuses, et cetera. So there is it's not just that the money's going away, there's nothing you could do about it. The state could abide by what the Trump administration is expecting of those institutions and still get the funds.
Yeah, I don't know that that's entirely accurate in the case of some of our rural hospitals in specific. And I also think that we should be very, very wary about attempts to, pit aspects of the working class generally in Washington state against one another. The fact of the matter is that part of the reason why H.R. 1 is going to have such a devastating impact on healthcare in this country is because it is, in essence, a tax break that is paid for by rollbacks of social services. So while we're, talking about, immigrants who might be using Medicare, or talking about trans people that are seeking healthcare and, pitting ourselves, one against the other internally, the global perspective on this is that T-Mobile, Microsoft, Amazon, all of those corporations and more have received very, very large tax breaks as a result of H.R. 1. And those tax breaks are going to be funded by the rollbacks that we're going to be seeing to the social safety net. So I would really, really question somebody to think about what their values might be, that they're feeling better about, looking horizontally at somebody that's trying to get healthcare in a healthcare facility and not saying, wait a minute, I have caregivers in my family, parents in my family, aged people who are in my family who might be depending on health services that are at risk.
Yeah.
And those are getting rolled back because President Trump and H.R. 1 in specific make it so that there's a very large tax break for those companies, and we're the ones who are paying for it.
Yeah, and I think it'll be just a fundamental disagreement that I don't think we can get past on where our federal dollars should be going. I don't believe people who are in the country illegally should get a dime of any sort of taxpayer funds whatsoever. I do not believe that any form of taxpayer money should go to subsidize surgeries for children to try to change their gender. So I think we will probably just never agree on that.
Perhaps.
Yeah, and that's fine, but so then you kind of get past this. I'm in support of a lot of what the Trump administration is doing and trying to put restrictions or requirements, work requirements in place for people to be able to access federal dollars. I'm probably maybe in the minority on some of that in Washington State.
Right, and I think you would actually probably be even in a smaller minority than you think, because you have a lot of districts where people, for example, cast their ballot for Dave Reichert, who won overwhelmingly in a number of staunchly Republican counties.
Yeah.
But just as strong as their support for that GOP candidate was the support for taxing capital gains to fund early learning and childcare. As we talked about before, rates of Medicaid reliance tend to be higher in some GOP-led districts. So I do actually think it is, I'm glad that you have some recognition around the idea that taxing the rich to fund basic services. Being against that is a minority opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think you're creating a conclusion that isn't quite a straight line. I also think that the reason, because there was more than one initiative that won in red counties that never should have won. I think there was a really dishonest campaign about the initiative. For instance, the initiative to repeal the Climate Commitment Act, which was Governor Jay Inslee's signature climate policy, that was winning in red counties where Dave Reichert won as well. And that makes no sense, And so I think there was a deeply dishonest, and this idea that tax the rich, that's really all this does. I also think it's just a dishonest line because it's not factoring in the impact that taxing the rich and punishing people for their success has on the middle class and the lower class. And I'm happy to talk about that more, but it's always simplified down to tax the ultra wealthy, tax the rich, and nobody, including you, is willing to have an honest conversation about what that does up and down the economic spectrum.
Well, I came here because I wanted to have an honest conversation.
Yeah.
I didn't think
Well,
we were.
let's have one.
I didn't think we were not going to talk about tax policy. So let's get into this a little bit.
Well, I think the issue is this. For instance, what's happening in Seattle right now is a perfect example of this. There was the Jumpstart tax.
Right.
Of course, you were around when they were doing the first head tax debacle, and that eventually got repealed, and then Jumpstart. So there's a few issues I have with the concept of the Jumpstart tax as a, tax the rich, right?
Right.
One of them fundamentally is people who are socialists or progressive, they always, what's the other phrase you use a lot? Pay their fair share, pay a living wage. So here you have these companies that are literally paying a living wage. They're paying their employees over $125,000 a year.
Right.
And as soon as they do it, bam, you punish them for it. How does that make any sense?
Well, I think I'm really, really happy that you brought up the Seattle example because it is the case that the Well Washington Fund, House Bill 2100, is the closest analog that we have for this policy. Comes from two sources. The other one we can talk about later, but the Jumpstart tax, ratified as it was in 2020, revenues that come from the Jumpstart tax are greater now than they were 5 years ago.
That's not true. No, Bruce Harrell came out and said they're not getting their $76 million below their revenue projections, and that's because they've lost tens of thousands of jobs over that tax.
No. What Bruce Harrell, to my understanding, what Bruce Harrell came out and said is that though there was a shortfall in the expectation, the overall trajectory is still greater than it was. The overall trajectory is an upward one. Even when adjusted for inflation.
Yeah, so that's the difference is the projections aren't being met because, so I think we can both be saying something that's true, and it's just different. We're looking at it a different way. Where they projected the amount of revenue coming in, it's not even close because he says they've lost tens of thousands of jobs over the tax.
Right, and so if you're looking at policies that may have had something to do with job loss, I think that the tax policy of Jumpstart had way less to do with what was going on with the revenues being less than projected. Though the overall trajectory is still a greater one where you have more payroll expenses that are subject to Jumpstart than when Jumpstart was passed. I would look to the fact that there have been many companies that have already been doing their best to divest from human labor of any kind with artificial intelligence technology, and those investments are designed to, in fact, reduce payroll expenses. But as a matter of tax policy, the city of Seattle is doing much better as a result of Jumpstart being passed, so much so that it's actually now using Jumpstart funds to backfill a number of things that Jumpstart was never supposed to have supported. So I would say that that is one, the first analogous example that we have of a tax like this actually working and actually improving the business climate in Seattle. The second part of it comes from the additional Medicare tax, which people who are making $125,000 already pay on their federal tax returns. So my bill in a lot of ways amounts to an invitation. It's saying if you're a large corporation, you have somebody who is making over $125,000 annually, they have already been paying in to support the social safety net federally. We can do the same thing in Washington state, and that's going to be something that is actually good for the overall business climate in our state.
Let's hone in though on, I just want to talk about the issues with the Jumpstart tax, and
Right.
I think you discussed a few of them, but the first issue that I addressed, I want you to respond to, because you're saying that you're doing all this for working people.
Right.
But you skipped over the fact that in order to get those revenues into city coffers, companies shed tens of thousands of jobs in the process. Is that trade-off worth it to you?
No. I believe that the corporations that you're talking about that did shed, wherever the job losses were, and I do not believe that those were sustained within the Seattle city limits, because Jumpstart is doing better now than it was when it was originally passed. I would say that there are policies that those corporations are taking independently of what the tax climate is. They have received a number of pretty plush corporate subsidies within Washington state generally, $475 million over the last 6 years for companies that are operating data centers, to give just one example. You would have a hard time identifying a state that has been more friendly to business with respect to the subsidies that are given out, with respect to a corporate-friendly tax regime, which I do believe that we have. And so those companies, if they're shedding jobs, those might be investments, and I think that they are investments that they're making on their own volition.
But you don't know that. You don't know. Bruce Harrell came out and said that we're losing jobs because of the payroll tax. So he's either lying, he was lied to.
Oh, I believe that it's possible for politicians to make mistaken statements, and it's possible for politicians to have their stances on particular issues that jive with where they believe their constituencies are. But it's the fact of the matter is, I think more people within the city of Seattle right now agree with the standpoint that Jumpstart has been healthy for the business climate there, because the person who's probably singularly most responsible for stewarding it just got elected mayor. So there are similarly great things that we can do at the state level. I think with a similar kind of Jumpstart payroll tax that, with a similar kind of payroll tax that is going to impact the largest 1% of corporations. And when those revenues get redistributed to programs that people depend on, I think you'll see that we're going to be a much healthier state as a result.
So all these people are just either mistaken or lying. I mean, when the Jumpstart tax passed, Amazon said what it would do, and it did what it said it would do. It took 10,000 jobs and it moved them to Bellevue. So kept them in the state, but moved them to Bellevue.
Right.
Just 2 weeks ago, after you made your introduction of the Well Washington Fund, the mayor of Bellevue, who's no Republican, I mean, she's a progressive Democrat, said, we benefited as a city from Seattle's Jumpstart tax. And now if you pass a similar tax statewide, she's very worried about what will happen to the jobs that came to her because of the bad tax policy in Seattle.
Right.
So Amazon said, we're doing this because of the Jumpstart tax. The mayor of Seattle said, we're losing jobs because of the Jumpstart tax. And Bellevue said, we're getting jobs because of Seattle's Jumpstart tax.
Right.
So that tells me that jobs are leaving Seattle because of the Jumpstart tax.
What it tells me is that there are, what you just laid out, what that sort of says to me is that there are many corporations that are looking within Washington state to see what kinds of programs are going to be funded or not supported here. Jumpstart was something that did well within the city context. For my bill, because I have to be concerned about the state legislature, I look at the fact that if you're an Amazon or you're a Microsoft, if you're a very large corporation, by the way, that have a pretty intense lobbying presence in Olympia, so they're kind of used to getting their policy outcomes
Everyone
heard
has
in
lobbyists
Olympia.
in Olympia, including the unions who have the strongest lobbyists in Olympia
Yes.
and who have the most influence above and beyond any corporation in the state. It's not even close.
Right. Well, I think when you have the 6th largest corporation spending $2.1 million lobbying the state legislature, they're doing that because they expect a return on their investment.
What does the teachers union expect?
I think the teachers union probably expects adequately funded higher education in K-12 schools. I think that's a pretty reasonable social program to support. You would disagree?
No, but we have leaked audio from a meeting where they're talking about way more than education. They're talking about going to Olympia and lobbying for a progressive agenda that has much more to do than just education. We just played it on our show this week. I
Well,
think
if
they're interested
Right.
in anything that will get money into their coffers. And the state has paid the WEA handsomely for its political support.
Would you say that you think K-12 institutions and public schools are in a state of they're overfunded right now? They have too much money?
I do.
So I think that again is a position that, as you had admitted earlier, would probably put you in a minority in the state of Washington.
I think they have too much money for a failing institution. I think they have been given more money every year for the last 15 years in the state, especially after McCleary, and they've shown us worse outcomes for it. Our test scores are lower, our enrollment is lower, our attendance is lower, not even close. So now we have an institution that we've been giving more money to for it to fail our students. That's unacceptable. And nowhere in the private sector would an entity be allowed to get more and more funding and do worse and worse.
Well, I think this is, you were talking about socialism earlier. I believe that this is probably a crucial difference between not just the socialist and maybe the conservative worldview, but I think that if you're somebody who relies on a public institution of any kind, healthcare is a really good example that I come back to often. I don't believe that we're supposed to be running healthcare as a business. I think that the bottom lines in healthcare outcomes are measured in health, in the prosperity that people feel as a result of being able to get better after they get sick. Somebody gets injured on the job, a social safety net that is there to support them. These are some of the core agreements that I think that we came to about a century ago in this society.
I want to make sure you understand here. I agree with what you're saying.
Right. And so when we talk about the public schools example, I think that this is in line with a similar kind of conversation where we can identify all kinds of issues of administration or distribution of a public good like public schooling. I'm just not somebody who believes that schools would be better, healthcare would be better, higher education or housing would be better if those institutions had fewer resources.
But we're talking about outcomes. I'm not talking about literally run it like a business so we're profiting off the education and healthcare. I disagree with that. I think the strength and the success should be measured in the outcome. If our K through 12 public schools were some of the best in the nation, if we had more than a failing grade in math and science and English language, I would say give them more money. They're teaching the future generation of America.
Right.
But do you not have a fundamental problem with the fact that they're spending more per student than ever before, only to send kids out of school with failing grades?
Well, it's definitely the case that that Washington State's funding model for public education is one that even people who are administrators and teachers have criticized. And I share in the criticism in as much as what we're talking about is the outcomes not being where we would like them to be. My thing is that actually, if we were to take a look at our funding model, it was not devised by the current state legislature. That was a product of the Senate in 2017, and the state legislature had come up with what is called the prototypical funding model, which is very much a neutral, was designed to be a revenue neutral model that actually hurts rural school districts a lot more than it hurts big city school districts like the one that I represent in the state legislature. So there again, I think if you were somebody that was, talking about public schools in Kennewick, perhaps out on the peninsula, on the eastern side of our state, they would say we're not getting anywhere near the kinds of resources that an Olympia or a Seattle school district might be getting. So I think even they would tell you once again that some of their issues run into how we're deciding to go about allocating resources right now.
You keep talking about money though. It's all about like if we had more money we could do better. If we had more money we can do better. It's never been shown. You give me one single issue in the state that if we give it more money it does better. Look at homelessness. I mean, just be honest about this. We spend way more money on homelessness than we ever have before.
Right.
Homelessness gets worse every single year. We call it the homeless industrial complex.
You call it the homelessness industrial complex.
Sane people, but this is a critical issue. I want to believe you when you say that, I want money into these things I care about. Because I imagine when you say that, that's because you want education to be good.
Of course.
You want kids to leave school with the skills they need to be able to embark on their lives.
Right.
But you're not explaining to me why we have more money per pupil in the state than ever before with test scores that are below what Mississippi is now able to implement.
And that's a travesty. That's absolutely a travesty. I want to go back to something that you said a little bit earlier, because I do think that these examples kind of weigh on one another. I'm actually not asking you to believe only me about the issue of housing and homelessness in Washington State. The policy context for this is we're going to get ready to see very, very large reductions to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. That might be something that you'd be in favor of, perhaps, because you maybe believe we are spending too much money on those programs at present. In 2018, no less than the Seattle Chamber of Commerce conducted a study, I believe it was with the McKinsey Institute. In 2018, they indicated that in order for the city of Seattle, the King County region, to effectively eliminate homelessness, which was the goal of the study that they commissioned, the city county would probably have to spend something on the order of $450 million annually from that point forward for the next decade. So what I say is, I'm not asking you to believe me. We had some pretty large corporations weigh in on this issue, close to a decade ago. And I believe that if some of the recommendations that they had put forward, again, this is the business community saying this, if we had listened to some of the recommendations they had put forward, maybe we would be in a better position with respect to those issues.
What do they want to spend money on?
You would have to ask the Chamber of Commerce.
Well, that's key, right?
We look forward to having that conversation with them around my bill, which is going to support housing programs which are potentially going to be defunded by H.R. 1. But these are, conversations that you hope to have in the legislative process, and so...
What their recommendations were to spend money on, it could be the crux of everything, because if their recommendation was spend money on more treatment programs, and we didn't do that, well, yeah, that's probably why homelessness is worse. Because the notion that we'll fix homelessness by building more houses is one of the stupidest things I have ever heard. Have you ever had someone that you've heard that has gotten out of addiction and homelessness by being put into an apartment building?
Well, I think that it's important for us to look at what housing means for people in sophisticated ways, right? For many years.
Let's not even be sophisticated. Let's just look at it at the baseline level. If housing fixed homelessness, we wouldn't be in this situation.
So for many years in this country, we had a federal commitment to making sure that visible homelessness and houselessness, visible poverty, would never reach the extent that it eventually did. We saw in the 1980s and 1990s in this country, despite what some of the rhetoric might be around the Housing First program, it is demonstrably the case that the federal government has spent less money on the kinds of housing services that keep people well and off the streets. When those investments federally stopped, as well as other rollbacks that happened at city and county levels, the demise of single room occupancy hotels is one example that leaps to mind. When that federal funding went away, it was up to cities and states, counties to try to come up with a patchwork of funding and solutions. And we're still catching up in a lot of ways to that donut hole in funding that was created by federal abandonment on this particular issue. And so when you talk about the question of, has there been a time where we have seen more spending actually address this issue to the extent that I think all the viewers in your show would like it to be, that was the case for much of the 20th century in the United States. Strong commitment that we had to housing services, anti-poverty programs that were an economic lifeline for many people. Higher education is something that we tend to overlook in these questions as well, but when you look up what people were spending on higher ed in the 1950s, and you see that it kind of looked like they were spending just about the same amount that people are spending every 2 weeks for groceries now. That doesn't make anybody stronger. There are no communities that are better off, no communities that are healthier as a result of that kind of step back from the public sector. And so my particular bill is about, returning to a time in this country where we had a pretty grand bargain between, large corporations, the public sector, and working people, that we were going to fund the programs that people depended on. Education is going to be pretty affordable. Housing was going to be intensely subsidized, either through public housing units or through large suburbs that were created through government action. Medicaid, Medicare getting created in the 1960s. These were programs that were really good for people. And I think that when we do our best to fund them and stand them up, we're going to be in a better place.
Yeah, it would be a mistake to believe that the homeless crisis of today is the homeless issues that were driving people into poverty and homelessness in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, or early 2000s. That was before fentanyl and it was before heroin. And what led to the homeless crisis getting so bad in Seattle was the heroin crisis that then became the fentanyl crisis, and the push from people with your political ideology to just let people do drugs and live out in the open. So it was a hands-off approach to a crisis that was driving people to live and die on the streets.
Yeah, statistically, I think you blended a few historical eras there from the 50s to the 2000s. I mean, that's just as somebody who studied history at the University of Washington.
We didn't have a fundamental, maybe crack in the 90s,
right?
But we didn't have a drug crisis like we have now.
Oh, I think that there are a lot of areas for disagreement in saying that the crack cocaine epidemic was maybe not as bad as what we're seeing right now. I think that both of those epidemics comprise real public health issues that policymakers have to be very attentive to. We did have at some point in time in the country, an approach that said, well, we can maybe try to arrest our way out of this as an issue. That really did not work. So I'm glad to see that we've at least turned the corner in the conversation around heroin and fentanyl now to where people are acknowledging that maybe there are some people that actually could use certain kinds of treatment, maybe subjecting people to, or maybe allowing people to be subject to houselessness, no education opportunities, and this is a healthcare issue as well. Maybe we ought to be approaching this with a little bit more compassion, and I think that that's the role that policymakers should play on these questions.
Yeah, and I mean, I have, I don't know how familiar you are with my background, but my dad died homeless. He was drug addicted. He had a lifetime of mental illness. And this is what pisses me off when people say the house issue. My dad had a house. He had a family.
Right.
At one point in time, he had a job.
Right.
I could have, at one point in my career, put him in a big, beautiful house, and he still would have died in that house.
Right.
So that's what it bothers me when there is this focus on housing. And if you've seen any of the Plymouth housing, low-income housing, they become de facto drug dens where people die in squalor with a roof over their head. What's the difference if someone dies on the street with a needle in their arm, or if someone dies in a Plymouth housing apartment with a needle in their arm? Have we really improved their circumstances by putting a roof over their head?
Well, I would say that their circumstances probably would not have been made any easier if they did not have housing. I think that that's something that is definitely the case with people that are struggling with addiction.
So we spend $1 million so they can die inside so we can feel better about ourselves?
Well, I don't think I would want to see anybody, perish as a result of going through something like substance abuse. That's a very important issue that policymakers have to be extremely sensitive to. And I'm sorry to hear about, I was not aware about that issue with in your biography with your father. Rest in peace to him. To all the people who we have seen on city streets who have struggled with this issue very, very visibly. The one thing that I look at is I don't think that their lives are going to be made better as a result of us devoting fewer resources to it. And so that's where a bill like mine enters into the picture and saying, whatever the network of support people who might be struggling with those issues might need, it's going to be, at least in part, the responsibility of the state to say, we can use housing to connect people to services. One of the things that I hear so much is around people who are looking for worker re-education opportunities. So that's where our community and technical colleges come in.
Yep.
And by the way, those are going to be institutions that are going to be struggling for funding as a result of some of the federal austerity policies that we've seen. So here again, House Bill 2100 is something that's designed to provide support in an area where I think people are going to be going without it too often.
Yeah, and if we were sitting here in a situation where we had figured it out, we'd finally, because we're in this homeless crisis now. We can't spend less money on it. I agree with that. We're going to have to spend a boatload of money if we hope to fix this issue.
So we agree.
Right. The problem is there is a real lack of willingness to move away from things that have not worked. And we are pissing away billions of dollars on a false narrative that the homeless crisis will be solved through housing. And Governor Governor Ferguson just donated I say it donated because it's literally using our money towards nothing. Another $250 million to housing. If you were sitting here and you were willing to acknowledge, what we've been doing isn't working, we need to move the money to something that does. But there's this complete lack of willingness to even acknowledge that, hey, our homeless response, our education system, it's not having the intended outcome. So we have to fundamentally change what we're doing. So that's the issue, is you want more money so you can piss it away in the same way that our state has pissed away the last $20 billion.
No, I don't think that that's the case. I think that, I'm somebody who sits on the Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee, and so our responsibility is to go back and look at the impact that certain subsidies that maybe we have given are having on our institutions. If we extend a tax subsidy, are we seeing, for example, the jobs that were promised in response to it? And we have, many people who are serious, policy-minded people who may have come out of the public schools administration system, who could speak a lot more to how those resources need to be apportioned at the grassroots level. I'm somebody who, my predecessor was Speaker Emeritus Frank Chop, very much a big picture thinker. For 20 years, the Speaker of the House. He tended to look at issues facing our state from a global perspective, trying to see the entire legislature. I'm a first-year lawmaker, so I'm trying to focus on the issues that I think I have a voice around improving the nature of our discussion. Sitting on the Finance Committee, I look at the revenue conversation. I believe that is part of the reason why voters selected me to represent them in Olympia is because of my sensitivity in particular to the revenue conversation. And it is in the process of the legislative, sausage making that we see those outcomes hopefully improve as a result of, the conversation that we can have. But I don't think anything gets better when we're saying we want to have people get fewer resources. And so
I'm not
that's
talking
where
about
I
fewer.
land
I'm
on.
talking about we're growing every year. Our
Right.
budget grows every year. So we're not talking fewer. Every year, education gets more money, homelessness gets more money.
Right.
Almost everything across the board has gotten more money because our budget has ballooned.
Yeah.
Yet, yet the results are worse.
Right.
So how are you going to sit here and pitch to me more money when we've done more money every year
Right.
and gotten worse results?
Well, because people keep coming to Washington State. Have you noticed?
I don't know if that's true. We lose a taxpayer every 27 minutes.
Well, I don't believe that that's true because most of our state's tax revenue actually comes from regressive property and sales taxes, which nobody wants to pay. I think that's part of the reason why somebody's, looking at something like HB 2100 and says, maybe it should be the largest 1% of corporations that starts to actually pay their fair share because working people have been doing it all along.
But on the issue I keep bringing up, Representative, we have had more money. No one has used the phrase austerity and like that we're paupers in a poorhouse scraping for money. We're just not. Our budget has ballooned immensely.
Right.
And all these areas you say you care about in our state have been getting more money.
Right.
And the outcomes in those areas are worse. How can you justify another tax to send more money toward a state that has failed to address the issues that it says that it's addressing?
Oh, I don't know that all of the issues that we're seeing have gotten worse, or that people have to say that they don't trust government because spending is gotten too large. And so I don't believe that that's where most people land on this issue. I think that people over the years have come to depend on Medicaid in our state. College has been actually made more affordable than it would have been for thousands of people as a result of the workforce education account. Early learning and childcare investments, I think that those are things that we have poured more money to in recent years, and people recently elected to say, we want you to keep doing it. So I think that the majority of people in our state look at these issues from the standpoint of, well, we want the funding to go commensurate to the scale of the issues that funding is trying to solve. So as long as we have people that are having a hard time getting a college education, we need to make sure that we're getting resources so that people can, have their college grants and attend their 2-year schools. I don't think that losing $50 billion of Medicaid, which might be the case over the next decade, is going to make anybody feel any better about healthcare in our state. And housing, which we've talked about. I think even you had admitted that it's not a question of taking resources away. It's about we adequately fund our programs and then we figure out what works. So, but none of that can happen if we're not also having this serious conversation about massive federal divestment, which will happen as a result of H.R. 1, which will happen as a result of certain austerity measures that have been implemented in recent years. And so those are some of the issues that I believe I have to be sensitive to as a representative from the 43rd.
Yeah, I mean, blaming Trump is just sort of off the table for me. I think Democrats have blamed him for too many things.
You have a better relationship with him than I think many in Washington State do.
Yes,
right.
But probably, But I think that it's like crying wolf at this point. For the last 15 years of my career, and 10 of those under President Trump, or when he came on the scene, you guys blame Trump for literally everything. And we have all these crises in the state that existed before him. They've worsened in a way that you can't blame on President Trump.
Well, President Obama deported way more people and is known among many as a deporter-in-chief.
Right,
so I
but the Democrats don't acknowledge that.
Well, I believe that it's important for us to be consistent in our criticisms, and I think that there are a number of issues that land pretty squarely at the feet of presidents who even many Democrats would tell you they felt a little bit betrayed by how they acted in office.
Because as I pointed out to you at your press conference, Democrats wanted a version of your Well Washington Fund and the tax last year before Trump was elected
Right.
for his second term. And so then it's like, oh, we need this now. And now you're saying, oh, we need it because of Trump's H.R. 1, which
Right.
hadn't even been conceptualized when they introduced it last year.
Yeah, that's not quite accurate. So the Well Washington Fund, House Bill 2100, is a significantly different bill than the one that Senator Saldana
It's the
dropped
same
last
idea.
year.
It's expanding the concept of Seattle's payroll tax statewide.
And it also has a pretty different income threshold, number one, so it would be raising significantly more money and asking major employers to pay the same tax that employees who make $125,000 already pay. The other component that makes it different is that we would actually have sort of a team of gubernatorial House and Senate appointees who would be keeping tabs on where federal divestment is going, the trajectory
Thank
of
God,
it.
more bureaucracy. Can't wait.
And if, as somebody who's in government, I think that government can do great things. And so somebody who's not in it can have a differing opinion. But I believe that when you have smart people who are paying attention to macroeconomic trends in a room making policy recommendations to people that are going to be making some pretty big decisions with spending, I'd rather have more smart people paying attention to that. Higher education is a good thing, I think. So when you have, people who perhaps went to our universities who are saying we want to make sure that that trough is refilled, I think that's a good thing. And I think that many people in our state would agree that we want to have a real sensitivity to where H.R. 1, as well as other austerity measures that were implemented earlier this year, might be taking us. And I think it's important for us to take a responsible stance about where our state spending is going to go and who it can support as a result of actions we take in the legislature.
If I saw any humility from Democrats in Olympia, if I saw any recognition that they haven't made progress and in fact have gone backwards in certain areas that are key to our state, if I saw an acknowledgement that we have to make a fundamental change in the way that we deal with homelessness, clearly in the way that our education system is run, I would be much more apt to say, wow, they've recognized that whatever we're doing isn't working. Maybe they can be trusted with additional revenue, but until I see that.
Do you think that it's a good thing that, would you agree that income inequality is one of these questions that people have been talking a lot about it, but maybe we haven't been making as much progress
I don't have a
as we'd like
problem
to
with
see?
income inequality.
So you think you're fine with some people making like gobs and gobs more money than other people to the point where some people can't afford to go to school or get health care or have housing?
Yes.
Okay.
I am fine with people. I believe America is great because it's a meritocracy. I believe every individual has the ability to earn a living wage on their own merits. This isn't a North Korean forced labor camp. The Starbucks baristas who are setting up tents because they want to get paid more when they get paid over $20 an hour to be baristas, and they get their education paid for if they want, and they can get job training. I think there is a victim mentality that is forming among a segment of the political class in this country that's deeply unhealthy. And so if somebody like Jeff Bezos, who started Amazon in the garage of his house, can build it into what it is now, I believe he deserves to be one of the richest men on the planet.
So you said I think this idea of making America great, I look at the fact that—
I don't think I used the president's phrase. I said,
pretty sure you
did.
did.
What makes America a great country is it's a meritocracy.
Right.
And I think anything other than a meritocracy creates a victim mentality that is contrary to what America is about.
I think it's really interesting that you say this. So I think about the 1950s in this country. I think about that being a time where many people I know who are conservatives look back on and saying that there was something about the fundamental agreement about society that was reached, that at that point it just seemed to be working a lot better than it was at later points, and probably was working better at that time than it had been at any time before in the United States. And then I go and look at what the corporate tax rates were like in the 1950s, and they were pretty high. And they were pretty high because the country had a lot of expenditures for making college really affordable for people. I think the Make America Great Again era was one where people had to hustle a lot less than they do right now because they had basic needs that were taken care of. Huge subsidies for housing in large suburbs across the country. Very affordable higher ed. Medicaid getting passed in 1963 or 4, I believe it was. And so these are, basic macroeconomic agreements that our country came to at a time that was more socially conservative than it is now. And yet there was more of a public sector backbone, safety net that people could rely on than what we have now. So I don't think that we're better off as a result of having a dog-eat-dog society, one where you can accumulate large amounts in the institutions that people that may be trying to get a fifth of the way that you got are not doing so well.
Yeah.
And I think that's bad for democracy. I think it's bad for our social fabric.
Well, I look at myself personally, and I grew up in poverty, had a pretty rough childhood, a lot of domestic violence issues. The reason that I went the path that I did, I wanted to be on the news because I didn't want to be at home. And I watched the war correspondence at the beginning of the Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Right.
And I thought, well, gosh, if I could be there, I don't have to be here. And I did everything in my power from 6th grade on to get out of where I was, to go to college. I struggled, for 10 years after college in a career that didn't pay very much. And now I'm upper middle class. I built a business. I built a show that people find value in.
Right.
And I didn't do I'm not evil for having done that. I don't believe anyone is entitled to anything that I've created. But at the same time, I choose to be generous with my money. I choose to donate. I choose to help people. But that's a choice that I have made. The idea that the government believes it's entitled to anything that I've created, or that it has to extract my wealth to give to people who are in the same circumstances that I was 30 years ago, I fundamentally reject.
Yeah, and that's I think a position that is not so much a mainstream one in Washington State, just because I look at the fact that we had a lot of people that might feel similarly about what it means to have to struggle individually, who also said, well, wait a second, we have some pretty large corporations that are doing really, really well, some of whom, you speak up in favor of, but actually donated to some candidates who you don't agree with. So I think even you would believe that corporate power in Washington State is in a state of largesse where there's not a lot of accountability. And the institutions that people depend quite a lot on, meanwhile, early learning, childcare, K-12, there's some people who said, yeah, we agree with the exact same economic philosophy that you just talked about as personified in Republican candidate for Governor Dave Reichert. Thousands of those same voters turned around and said, we want to make sure that we're taxing capital gains. So how would you explain that?
I think that the campaigns were built on lies. I think the Democrats and the unions spent $40 million selling lies to voters about every single one of those initiatives to keep their hands on money.
Well, these were staunchly Republican legislative districts, however, that made the more conservative decision in just about every other election that took place in November of 2024.
But not with the initiatives. The initiatives at
Many
the beginning.
Of them, if I could finish, there are people who voted for Donald Trump because they believed that he was somebody who was going to deliver on affordability.
Yep.
There were people who voted for Dave Reichert because they liked what he had to say about certain issues more than Ferguson. So they were pretty well informed. I personally, this might be a point of departure. I actually believe that Washington State voters are very educated people, and I believe
You're saying, I see what you did there. It's not a point of departure. I also believe people are smart.
Right, and I believe that people can see through an election mailer, people can see through a lie through a candidate, and people have chosen much more the direction of our institutions supporting us versus an order where we're not getting that kind of support that we're, by the way, very happy to give to some corporations that, as you know, actually are not always in agreement with you, right? I saw the tweet.
You called me a corporate mouthpiece. I'm like waiting for the checks from the corporations. Where are my checks from the corporations if I'm a corporate mouthpiece?
Well, I don't think
should I not be getting money from them?
I don't think you should be doing corporate apologies for free. I do believe that all people are entitled to compensation for their labor.
Thank you.
So if you find yourself doing a lot of water carrying for Microsoft, then...
This is the question. I mean, I think there's a lot of questions I've asked that I haven't gotten a clear answer to, and this is really one of them.
Right.
The reason, and I've articulated it very well on the show, it's not about, I could give two shits about Amazon as a structure, as a company. It's not about Amazon and protecting Amazon. It's about protecting what Amazon contributes to the rest of the state.
Right.
What you fail to acknowledge, to recognize, and what will be the undoing of our state if something like your bill were to pass, is the contributions that Amazon's existence makes up and down our economy. You look at the restaurants that have closed in recent months. They're in the heart of Amazonia. They've closed after Amazon started moving jobs to Bellevue. Amazon reflects and is responsible for directly hundreds of thousands of jobs in the city of Seattle. That if Amazon
Not quite
disappeared,
that many, probably thousands of.
I'm talking
thousands
about
of jobs.
No, I'm talking about the ecosystem.
You said hundreds
I'm
of
talking
thousands
about
of jobs.
the ecosystem that has nothing to do with Amazon as a corporation, but exists because Amazon exists. You have the restaurants, the bars, the doggy daycares, the laundromats. You have an entire ecosystem of small businesses, which is my priority, that exists because Amazon has chosen Seattle as a place to have tens of thousands of jobs. You take it away, Shaun, and all those jobs disappear overnight.
Right.
And I don't know that you fully appreciate or recognize that.
Well, I believe that I understand where some of this question is coming from, because I think that deindustrialization is in many ways a foundational trauma. Districts like mine have tended to understand that there's a way for us to support a strong social safety net. So when people fall out of work for whatever reason, that doesn't mean they have to fall into poverty. And I would give Washington State more credit than I believe is being given presently, because we were a state that for many decades was a pretty vibrant place to do business before there was such a thing called Amazon. I believe that we had working people, strong institutions here, the University of Washington, Wazoo, if
Boeing.
you like. Boeing is a corporation.
Amazon's hardly the first major corporation that has been headquartered here and contributed to our success.
Right, and I think that the relationship, to me, it's better when we think of it as a reciprocal one. Boeing really can't do what it does if you did not have a lot of seed money provided in the way of federal subsidies. Amazon is a great example, both Amazon and Microsoft, of companies that have made use of initial investments that this country made in higher education. Take away federal defense grants to higher education in the 50s and 60s, and the tech industry probably doesn't incubate at the rate that it does. So, I think it's important for us to recognize that we are empowered as everyday people. I know we got into it a little bit in that conversation about what it would look like for Amazon to go away. I have faith in working people in our state that we would be able to come up with workplaces, institutions, small businesses, restaurants that are just as vibrant and would probably be able to recuperate a lot more of that tax revenue, which currently goes in the direction of some pretty big subsidies that Amazon has enjoyed.
Yeah, you made a comment that people on the internet found funny, that that workers could form a collective and do what Amazon does.
Right. And I take my cues on this from history. I look at the fact that in the peninsula, for example, we had strong logging communities that were responsible for large sums of fortunes that many timber industry magnates ended up seeing. I think that's the story out in the peninsula, 35th and 19th LDs, places that had a very, very strong timber presence historically, with a lot of workers there who were contributing a lot of labor that made the fortunes that those companies amassed possible.
Yeah.
So I believe that is, in talking about socialism, that is core to my ideals as somebody who is a socialist, in having faith in everyday people. That might not be where you come at it from. You might actually believe that
I see what you do there. You
do
this a lot. You might think people are stupid. You might think people don't have. I don't. What I'm trying to be is realistic, and I think there's a little realism that it falls short in some of your ideas.
I believe that it's important for us to support the economy at the grassroots,
yeah.
And that means having faith in the people that make our systems run.
We believe in the same thing. At our foundational value, we believe in the same thing. I'm living in a real world right now, in a real modern world, where tech companies exist, where big corporations exist, and where, for better or worse, our economy is very dependent on them in a state like Washington. And again, for better or worse, I think neither of us were alive at the time when our state started down the trajectory that it's on right now, where we're very reliant on a few key corporations for our economic vitality. And I think we actually come to the same place, but in very different ways. What I want is a working class where someone can work a job, have a family, and not struggle. And I worry that dismantling and vilifying the corporations that, for better or worse, have created a robust economy for us is going to put us in a depth of despair that the middle class will never recover from.
Do you believe that some of those corporations also depend on state programs for varying things, from a well-educated workforce and higher ed? Do you believe that state policy
Yes, but I think they can get it somewhere else.
Okay.
I think they can get it somewhere else, and that's the problem is I think you underestimate Amazon's willingness to pick up and leave.
Right. And I do think that there are probably some policy measures that they've taken internally that suggest that they do not actually have loyalty to any individual state.
I don't think they do either.
Right.
That's the problem, Shaun. That's the problem. I think you believe, because I'm supportive of Amazon and capitalism and all these things, that I hate the lower class, I hate the middle class. Couldn't be further from the truth.
Right.
But I recognize the system that we're working in. And I recognize that a company like Amazon has no loyalty to the extent that they're not going to stay here and lose money. They're not going to stay here and be targeted and vilified for taxation.
Right.
And they have more than enough money, as does Microsoft, to pick up and leave.
So why do you think that some of these companies supported the workforce education account, which I believe my bill, House Bill 2100, the Washington Fund, is modeled in a lot of ways on the workforce education account?
Well, because all the companies rely on workforce and education. And I also think that there's a desire from some of these companies, and has been, to appease progressive ideas, because they believe it'll make people like you and progressives back off of them a little bit, which it never will.
Oh, they're paying,
but they
pay to support the workforce education account to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars a year. So there's cheaper appeasement that they could achieve than that. What I'm getting at is that I think they support those. Why do you think they support them, I would ask?
What they're getting from them, they find value in it, right?
Right.
So the amount of money they're giving,
right,
they find value in. I also think that they get some societal points for doing it. But there will come a point where the value that they're able to extract from our state does not equal the value the state is extracting from them.
And do you feel, I mean, we do not make our policy decisions in a vacuum in Olympia.
Yeah.
We often talk about interstate compacts. Idaho, Oregon. I'll tell you, Massachusetts actually recently passed a millionaire's tax. What I'm getting at is that there are a lot of state legislatures that are arriving at similar conclusions that Washington has, and many of those states do not have the same historical pedigree of supporting the institutions that many of these corporations make use of. So Washington's a pretty good place to do business. I believe that there's a reason why some of those companies are seated here anyway. And it had to do with historic investments that we did make in many of these programs. So I guess I would say, when higher education goes away or is dismantled, when housing becomes prohibitively inexpensive or prohibitively expensive, when healthcare is more scant, that's not going to be really good for some of these companies either, and it's not going to be good. And that's why I would say the people who are actually here, happy to be here, contributing to the economy, those are the people who we should be supporting. And I think that many of those companies, because they supported something like a workforce education account, would agree.
Yeah, I just don't think the government is going to make any of those things better. I don't think our government is going to make any of those things better.
Medicaid?
Because, well, Medicaid is a different beast, right? And I do believe that Medicaid will be made better, stronger, more reliable by the restrictions that the president is placing on it. I believe we dismantle a system you claim to care about when you give it to illegals, when you give it to people who are sitting at home not doing anything, with no requirement to show that they're truly disabled or that they're looking for work. So I think there's so many abuses of those programs that we allow to continue, that those programs will self-destruct if we don't do something about it.
I believe that it is reckless to mortgage away an entire institution because there are a couple of people that you could identify that are accessing it in ways that you wouldn't prefer.
I think it's a couple. But.
And I think rural hospitals in particular, which are, if we're being frank, some of those are in some of the least diverse, most socially conservative areas of our state. That Medicaid spending is going away, could potentially go away if we don't pass something like 2100. And I think that it's going to be really cold comfort to tell some of the people that are no longer going to have access to health care that, hey, at least somebody who you disagree with isn't getting it either. I don't believe that those are the values of the people of our state. I think that they would prefer to see institutions that are well funded, and we can hash out our differences politically as we need to. But strong institutions, in particular healthcare, I think are things that should be universally accessible to all people.
Yeah, I think just we're kind of dancing around my fundamental problem with it is, you go down there, you've been there for a year, show me that you can solve hard problems without your automatic first instinct saying, give me billions of dollars. Show me you can solve some hard problems. Show me that you can get the Democratic caucus to agree that a lot of the things that it's doing, a lot of the money it's spending has not been spent well.
Right.
And then come back and say, hey, we're on the right track on some of these issues. Now let's ratchet up the revenue and let's fix them.
How did you feel about the $7 billion of public sector cuts that were made earlier this year?
I think that our state, well, you have to. So you have to have a balanced budget, right? And so legally, I think that our state has more than enough money to do everything it needs to do, and I believe that Democrats intentionally choose some of the hardest areas to make cuts so that people will feel it. I do believe Democrats intentionally cut from areas where people will feel it the most so that they can come back and justify a tax on high-paying jobs, so they can come back and justify an income tax, which they're going to push this year. And here's the reason I say that, Shaun. We're still spending money on things like a Department of Equity. We're still spending money on things like literally paying for laser hair removal and boob jobs for transgender prison inmates, men who want to go in the women's prison and feel more feminine.
Right.
We're spending money on some of the most asinine things at a time when you're telling me, oh my God, austerity budget, we have to cut from all these critical programs. We don't. We have to cut the fat of government.
Oh, I don't believe we have to cut from critical programs.
I believe we can do every single thing you want to do. I believe we could do every single thing you want to do with the money we have if you guys would stop giving $70 million to the WEA for a teacher training program that has only trained 12 teachers. If you guys could actually say, we have let our ideology run wild in the state budgeting process, let's focus on the real important things, the education, the poverty. So that's the fundamental problem I have, is you guys are spending money on too many things.
Right. Well, we spend money on a lot of money is spent on many things in Olympia. The fact that we have something like anywhere between a 75 and 81 or 82 billion dollar budget year over year.
Yeah.
I believe that a serious approach to right-sizing the budget, as it were, would have to involve looking at silos of spending where we're spending tens and tens of millions of dollars and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars versus nickel and diming, saying, hey, there are some people who are getting access to certain things that we...
But it all adds up.
I believe it does. But
do you believe that the taxpayer...
Well, you chose to highlight the subsidies that you chose to highlight.
Do you want me to list more?
Well, what I'm countering with is I'm saying we have spent over the last 10 years $475 million on subsidies for companies that operate large data centers, where very few of the jobs that were promised for those data centers actually materialized.
Then get rid of it. Shaun, if I don't care what it is.
Right, and then
if you've dedicated money to something.
I think you do care what it is, though.
No, I don't care what it is.
Oftentimes, I think some of the first examples that often come up are first of all, I've never heard you actually talk about corporate subsidies, so I think we might be breaking news here. If the headline that comes out of this conversation is Brandi Kruse opposes corporate subsidies.
What I'm saying is,
this conversation is going to be something that'll travel far and wide and is a win already.
If there's any money
but you didn't mention those.
Being spent, that was put there for a purpose, and the purpose never materialized.
Right.
That's taxpayer money that, in my opinion, has been defrauded and has been wasted, and that should never be refunded.
Right.
And as long as we agree on that and can apply it consistently, we have so many things that we're spending money on. Where Governor Inslee had a right-of-way initiative to clear the homeless out of government right-of-ways along state highways and to get them out of homelessness. They spent $1 million per person to get them out of encampments along the freeways.
I believe sweeps are a complete waste of money. Well, so I'm following you there.
It's a waste of money if, first of all, $1 million should be able to get 100 people out of a homeless encampment and into a better position.
It's almost like housing people versus sweeps is a better use of public funding.
Getting them treatment so that I'm in favor of housing, as long as there's treatment that goes along with it. But you can't just throw somebody in a house. That's the differentiator that I've made. But if there's anything in the government, we should be able to agree on this, that isn't doing, you said that you wanted the money for this. It didn't do that. Why are we going to give you the money again? We can agree on that?
I think that we can agree that there's a lot of wasteful state spending that goes in the direction of subsidies that do not materialize the benefits that they were supposed to have.
But in a lot of areas,
I believe in the healthcare. You brought up a healthcare example. I mean,
I did not bring up a healthcare example.
You brought up what was the
laser hair removal for transgender inmates?
Yeah, I don't.
That's not a healthcare example.
I didn't know that was the example that you brought up, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with people having access to gender affirming anything. And I think that you're nickel and diming the budget if you think that you're going to be able to find it, taking it from trans people.
First of all, I don't see nickel and dimes when I see money taken from taxpayers. That's a difference. I think every dollar taken from a taxpayer should be used wisely, because that's literally money, because you say you care about the working class. Every dollar the government takes from them hurts them. So let's not be flippant with nickels and dimes. Let's not be, I think there are people who utilize far less subsidies than what the government takes from them. And they're then subsidizing the lives of other people. But let's not be flippant. This is my issue. I think if you need food stamps, sure, but I think there's a lot of people who are paying into the government coffers far more than they're asking of the government in return. But I don't like the flippancy, and this is why you could tell I was pissed off at your press conference when the people behind you kept laughing. At the people who'd be impacted by taxes, they were giggling.
Yeah.
And I thought, I feel like there's a general lack of appreciation for what taking money out of people's pockets actually means.
Well, I think that some of the reactions that you may have seen at the press conference for House Bill 2100 had to do with the fact that there were many people who thought it was laughable that major corporations that just got a massive tax break as a result of HR 1 are going to be hurting more than people who are going to have their food stamps taken away.
Nobody said that, though. Nobody.
But I believe that was how you could see where it would be reasonable for somebody to come away with the nature of the discussion, that conclusion. I think that you have a base of listeners that you speak to who I believe might actually be dependent on some of the programs that we're talking about funding. I agree. 100%.
Yeah.
And I have people who in the course of my short career as a lawmaker who have recognized that my desire to make sure that we're funding our institutions, especially housing, healthcare, higher education, is genuine. They sacrifice their time. We had a great discussion, and that's what it's going to take to get a bill like HB 2100 passed.
Yeah, I think if we could come away with something productive, it would be my general feeling that there isn't an appreciation for the tax money that you look for being real money that's taken from people. And when you dismiss as nickel and dime, like for instance, our state spends millions on transgender care for prison inmates, like getting them laser hair removal and getting them boob jobs. Do you really believe that taxpayer money should be spent on something like that?
I have no qualms with people who are within correctional facilities, which is, when people come out of correctional facilities, I had the chance to visit one of those earlier this year, a women's correctional facility in the 26th Legislative District. And what I saw was that it can be a tremendously isolating environment, especially for people who are in what is called segregated housing. It might be a difference in how we look at the role that these institutions can play, but I believe that I would believe that there are probably 100 things before we get to
doesn't matter. I'm asking you a question.
Or making use of those kinds of resources within a prison.
It doesn't matter. Do you believe that taxpayer money should be spent giving a prison inmate laser hair removal?
I do, yeah. I think
Holy shit, Shaun.
I think if
that's crazy.
I think if that's somebody who is in a state-run facility, there are many people who might be within that correctional facility that are undergoing all kinds of personal transformations that it'd be very difficult for people on the outside to comprehend. So I'm going to look a lot of places before we get down to the part of saying that inmates that are making use of public funds is the responsibility of our budget woes to the extent that they exist.
Wow. The issue is that represents a mindset that you'd spend our money on anything. You'd spend our money on anything.
No, I don't believe that's true.
If you will spend money, Shaun, our money that we work hard for, the money that people who are far less well off than I am see come out of their out of their wallet every day, and if you would say that you would take that money and you would spend it so a convicted killer could get a boob job and laser hair removal, this is
an actual example.
This is an actual example.
Yeah.
And not to mention the fact that it's a man who stabbed his mother to death and now gets to be in a women's prison. Not to mention the stupidity of that. But if you're telling me that our money and my viewers' money that they need to feed their family and to buy gas should be used so that person can feel more feminine because they don't have pubic hair.
Right.
I cannot, that's a mindset that is broken beyond repair. And you're so smart. And I have a hard time with that.
Yeah. I think that there are probably a lot of people who are looking at many things that the state spends its money on and actually would probably not have as much of an issue if they felt with some of the differences that they might have with our trans community, And they'd say, well, that is a concern in the context of me feeling like I'm not able to access healthcare for myself. If somebody is facing a hospital closure, if somebody is spending a lot of money in order to get to college and it's way too unaffordable, I believe that there is a way that our economic system pits people one against the other. And so when you have institutions that are not doing as well as they could, people will often look towards, well, whoever's most proximal to them in the fight. The corporations are too distant and unaccountable. They will pick that fight with somebody who's a little bit closer to them. And so what my bill is about in a lot of ways is making sure that we're kind of resisting a zero-sum logic that says you have to be worrying about, what people are doing behind prison bars. That would be far less of a concern if you're somebody who I think had an economic floor, basic needs taken care of. You felt you were able to go to college and it was affordable, roof over your head, access to healthcare. And I think that the kinds of social divisions that I think that you're leaning into tend to fade away a little bit when people's basic needs are taken care of.
I can worry about it all. And I'll tell you what, talking about basic needs, I'd rather that money go to someone who needs food on their table. I'd rather that money go to someone who needs a little bit of help to pay their rent that month.
Right.
And so
And so why do we
I
have
think
to
you
pick,
can look at
do
it.
you think?
You are picking one over the other.
No, I'm saying in the same way that you're saying you can care about it all, I'm saying that we can be a state
Because
that has more of what we need.
There comes a point where you have to stop taking money from people. There comes a point where the government has to stop taking money from people, and you believe there's no ceiling for you.
You think that you believe that the government should cease to function? I don't understand
No,
what
I
you mean by...
believe that there has to be a limit to the amount of taxation.
Well, there is. The state of Washington forgoes way more tax revenue than it actually collects. We have over 600 tax exemptions and loopholes in our state tax code.
Right, but you're saying that we can pay for it all. We can pay for it all.
No,
and it's just that's absurd.
I think if I believe that a budget is an exercise in discipline in a lot of ways, and I believe that if we were a state that said, and if I'll keep it one-to-one, if I were somebody who believed that we can spend on literally anything, the first thing that we would look at is some of those large corporate exemptions that we have. Like I said, over 600 of them that exist. And those have not been repealed. There are many of them that ought to be. And so what I'm getting at is that there's a lot more that the state forgoes in the way of revenue. And many programs that we want to fund because people are going to depend on them.
Yeah, the reason I use that as an example, and yes, it's red meat for my audience, I get it, but it's one of these things that's so stupid that it shows that you're not foregoing anything. You're not foregoing, if you are willing to pay for a convicted killer to get his pubes removed, you are not foregoing anything.
Yeah, I don't concur with you on that side of it, because I think that if it were a question of the state just being able to do whatever it wanted with whomever's money, the first thing that we would look at is some of those exemptions, which is not currently the orthodoxy in Olympia right now, though I do believe that we should be considering that.
We could go back and forth on this. I think we have a different idea of the role in government in people's lives. Really quickly, there were no Democrats at your press conference. I know that they are eager to push through an income tax this year. That tells me that they're going to prioritize that over your Well Washington Fund. Do you feel like you're going to be able to get this off the ground at all?
Well, I think that we were happy to have, I think it is right now at 5 co-sponsors in running for the Well Washington Fund. I was happy to see the Washington Federation of State Employees represented at our press conference as well.
Oh, the union, shocker, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I think that it's very, very early to talk about what our priorities might be, except to say that we're probably going to be doing better things as a state when we have a tax code that places less emphasis on taking money from property and sales taxes. And so I feel good about the fact that there are multiple revenue options that we're going to be considering seriously this year. I will say that one advantage that the Well Washington Fund has is that unlike the wealth tax proposal, which is kind of on legally dubious standing, and unlike the income tax proposal, which is imminent and I believe will similarly have to be not only passed but defended both legally and perhaps via a referendum, we know that the payroll tax, which drives HB 2100, is perfectly legal. So when we start to see the impact of HR 1 on some of our food access programs, when we see the impact of it on people who are not going to be able to access Medicaid, Medicare, hospitals being hit. HB 2100 is going to address that situation in a way, I think, rapidly that some of the other bills that you might hear about or see about may not.
On the income tax, can we get some sort of guarantee? I think it's imminent. I think it's Democrats can do what they'd like to do. The state Supreme Court is basically putting in their hand, and I think that they've come up with a good strategy to paint it as the rich and the ultra rich. That seems to work with voters. Can we get some sort of guarantee that if there's an income tax, that you will cut other taxes?
Well, I'll answer that, but why do you think that works for voters?
Because I think when you paint people as big, bad, evil, rich people, they feel a disconnect from that. And they think, oh, well, it's not me. The problem is, as I've pointed out to my viewers, right now the income tax will be for people making over $1 million a year. In 2 years, it'll be for people making over $500,000 a year. And then give it 5 years and it'll be an income tax on every single Washingtonian. And Democrats can deny that, but it's exactly what will happen. So an income tax that they will get through by painting it as ultra rich will eventually become an income tax on every single citizen of the state.
Well, I believe that will be a contested
That's
conversation.
the goal though, isn't it?
In the conversations that I've heard about the income tax such as they are, it's been, from what I've seen so far, been pretty exclusively focused on high earners.
Do you want an income tax on every Washingtonian?
I don't believe that if you're somebody who's making poverty level wages at present, like you brought up the Starbucks strikers right now, I believe that would be a pretty hard pill to swallow if I were somebody who was barely making it within the city of Seattle. And there was a blanket income tax.
And that's true for the federal income tax as well. I think it's like under $22,000 a year. So you're basically saying, besides poverty level, which already wouldn't be a thing, you support an income tax on every Washingtonian.
I would have to weigh this. Would really have to weigh this against a number of other concerns. You brought up, for example, what it means to balance out our tax code. Actually, an organization called Balance Our Tax Code is a supporter of the Well Washington Fund, in part because it's a payroll tax that the largest 1% of companies is going to pay, not the mom and pop businesses that I know that you're very, very sensitive to in some of the remarks that you've made.
The other thing I want to ask you before I let you go, you've had a couple strikes against you in your first year in the legislature. While you were running, the PDC dinged you for using campaign funds to pay for haircuts.
Sure.
You just had a finding from the Legislative Ethics Board about conduct on social media. Which I'll get to more in a moment. Do you have a problem following rules? Should we be worried about that? You're a year in.
That's funny. No, I think what I would say is that this is one of the ways that we see an accountability process in the state legislature working. You make a mistake on the campaign trail and then get elected. People think of it as a mistake that you made as a representative. So in my first campaign for State House, it was not immediately clear to me what were sort of expenses that you could use for things that were directly devoted to the campaign trail and others that were a little bit more nebulous. But I was happy to pay.
You were told when that was first uncovered that it was problematic, and you said you were going to keep doing it until the PDC told you not to.
No, what I said was I believe that in many of the appearances that you might have to make as a political candidate, you're paying attention to how you're coming off in ways that you would not if you were somebody who was living a more private life. I was happy to abide by the PDC's ruling. We had a great hearing about it where we discussed some of the issues, and so I feel much clearer about those.
Okay. More haircuts.
And then I think that some of the rules around how to conduct yourself on social media, in specific, what that was about was whether or not you can use, in essence, state resources on a campaign account. Those are rules that people have had to get much more clear on in the last half decade as sort of rules around digital communication and how we communicate has shifted. So I feel clearer about those now than I did, I guess it would be at this point a year ago.
Okay.
And I think it's one of the examples that we have that processes of accountability, when we apply them, they actually work pretty well. So we should also thinking about making sure that some corporations that are
always
you have to bring it back.
Got to bring it back. You were also, and I don't know if this is part of the legislative ethics investigation, you were blocking some individuals on social media. You also blocked me on social media, Shaun, and here we are.
I'm sorry, did that hurt your feelings? I'm sorry about that.
I don't know that it necessarily hurt my feelings, but
wasn't right
why did you block me on social media?
So what?
I'm a nice person.
So what I think happened there is that I had a campaign account, or I was campaigning on my individual Twitter feed.
Okay.
And I was like, frankly, the kinds of people that you were rallying for, were not going to amount to much within the district and
Okay.
who we had to lobby to in order to win our election. And so I said, what we need to do is actually focus on the signal in this election. We ended up winning that election 68-32. And so as a result, there were a lot of people that came off of a block list when I was reminded that I didn't have to ignore them anymore because we had won overwhelmingly.
So you as a state lawmaker and public servant ignore people who aren't going to vote for you?
No. I think that has to do with the fact that was a campaign, that was a timestamp of where we were at in the course of the campaign. Now you're a state lawmaker trying to make decisions that are going to impact people positively, even and especially outside of the 43rd legislative district. That's why we're out here talking about how we're going to fund food stamps in higher ed for people that are even in, pretty staunchly conservative districts like the 35th and the 19th.
We're going to do it by spending the money we already have well, right?
We can do that.
Okay.
And we can also
That's fine.
get more money.
Yeah. I'll end with this. I want you to give me one example of socialism you think working well somewhere.
A good example of socialism working well somewhere, this is a really, really cool question. I think of the fact that my predecessor, the late Frank Chop, one of the last conversations that I had with him, we were at it was some sort of a fundraiser dinner shortly after I won my election. And he explained that he was probably going to be trying to travel to either Cuba or Vietnam coming up.
Okay.
And I didn't have the chance to ask him directly what that was about at that moment. But one of the things that I do know is that Cuba in particular, very, very high literacy rate, number one. Number two, extremely strong commitment to public health. So much so that when there are other ailments that are happening throughout the hemisphere, it is oftentimes Cuban doctors that you will see on the front lines of public health administration, their commitment to education. And so I think that there have been even many American policymakers that have said, we look at what Cuba has been able to do around education and healthcare in specific, and we look at the fact that we make some of our largest expenditures in healthcare, which is run a lot of ways along a privatized model in this country, and we don't get the outcomes that this small country has been getting for decades. So that's one example that I can think of that would resonate with pretty much anybody in our state who cares about education or healthcare. Would you disagree with that?
People flee on makeshift rafts and die in the ocean to flee Cuba for the United States.
Yeah, and I think that is something that absolutely we have to be sensitive to, but you asked me about institutions that are working really, really well.
I asked you about places socialism is working, and you chose a country that people will risk their lives to flee from to this country. There's a reason for that, Shaun.
There was a revolution in Cuba, that is correct.
They still do it to this day.
Right.
They show up on the beaches of Miami.
Right.
Because they would rather be here and would risk their lives in shark-infested water to flee the country that you just gave me an example of.
And if the situation were reversed, the injuries and the ailments that they sustain as a result of migrating to a place where they believe that they're going to be better off, I believe that they could be treated in a much better way than American healthcare facilities are currently able to treat people. So that's one example that I can think of socialism working very well in public health and in education.
All right. I hate to end on that because that is just a horrible example of socialism working because it doesn't work.
Healthcare and education?
This is a government that has killed people. It's a government people have fled from. Vietnam, I just had a woman on the show whose father spent 7 years in a re-education camp in Vietnam under the socialists and the communists.
What do you think of Native American boarding schools in the United States?
Well, I think that Native American boarding schools have been shown to be very problematic. And it's a different situation than what we're talking about with socialism not working elsewhere.
Right. I think in macro terms, a lot of economic systems are going to have faults and problems, but I look at the fact that socialist countries, communist countries in specific, there seems to be more of a floor that is placed in a collective commitment to making sure that if you slide, you're not going to slide all the way out of the ability to make a way for yourself at all.
Do you think America is a great country?
I think that I believe that there are aspects of greatness in the United States, in our people and in the devotion that we have shown to our institutions and the movements that have made us a more great country than where we started.
Is there anywhere that you would risk your life to flee to? from the United States?
Oh, I was born in the United States. I live here. My life is here. I'm proud to represent the 43rd Legislative District. So I'm not, if this is asking me if I'm running for re-election or not, I don't know what that question was about. But
I'm asking if our country is so bad that you would flee, to risk your life to flee from it.
No, I believe in staying and fighting. I believe in staying and fighting to make what you inherited better than how it was when you got it.
All right, Shaun Scott, I appreciate you taking the time. We spoke for way longer than I thought we would. And I'm glad we have some agreements, right? That we should fund all these critical things.
Housing, healthcare, higher education. You still haven't said you disagree with them.
No, I think we should fund them with the money we already have. You think we need more money. And I think that's about we agree that the priority should be the working class and the working poor.
Right. So then I can list you as an endorser for the Well Washington Fund, it sounds like.
You may not. You may not.